Hi everyone, my name is Natalie. Today I wanted to do a bit of a book haul. It's going to be the first one that I've done for this year, and I think one of the reasons is that I wasn't really planning on buying that many books this year, and it has sort of just happened without me realizing that I've been accumulating quite a few books. So I wanted to show you particularly the nonfiction books. Most of the fiction I've either bought for Invisible Cities or for the Booker International, so those will hopefully be in circulation and in wrap-ups if it hasn't appeared already. But the nonfiction books, several of them I bought because of the Springathon, some of them for other various interests. So starting off with the one that I am currently reading, we have Writing Out, A Journey of Love, Loss and New Beginnings by Simon Parker. This is a cycling memoir where the author is basically cycling through the UK in the autumn of 2020. The reason I was interested in this is because I really wanted to read a book on cycling, and sort of in the same vein as I've been enjoying books on swimming, I wanted to see if I could find a similar connection with cycling, because cycling is something I actually enjoy doing myself as well, in comparison to swimming, which isn't something I do very much of. Another book that I have started and reading currently for the Springathon is Where My Feet Fall, Going for a Walk in 20 Stories by Duncan Minshall, and this is an anthology of stories, so several different writers on walking. And the stories that I've read so far, they've been sort of in a mixture of how much they like walking in the first place. The reason I picked this one up was actually because Jessica J. Lee has a essay in this one, and I really loved reading both of her books last year, so I immediately wanted to own this one just to be able to read her story, but it also sounded like an anthology of such a wide variety of writers on walking and on nature could be really interesting. The next one I have is Losing Eden by Lucy Jones, Why Our Minds Need the Wild. I have wanted this one for a long time because I read Lucy Jones' Foxes Unearthed in 2015, I want to say, and it was the book that introduced me to nature writing as a genre, as many of you have probably heard me tell that story. This one is, as the title suggests, on well-being in connection with being outside, being in nature. I suspect that I will really connect with the themes of this book, how important nature is for several different reasons, but not least for our well-being and mental health. So there's that. Then we have two swimming related books. I have read recently Why We Swim by Bonnie Tsui, which I have also bought recently, but since I've already finished it, I won't go into it here. But because of that, I also wanted to pick up some other swimming related books to add to my TBR. So we have Swimming with Seals by Victoria Whitworth, which is a swimming memoir set in Orkney. This is a memoir of intense physical and personal experience exploring how swimming with seals, gulls and orcas in the cold waters of Orkney provided Victoria Whitworth with an escape from a series of life crises and helped her to deal with intolerable loss. So this is definitely right up my wheelhouse. I particularly love how swimming can become such a personal and meaningful thing for an individual in their mental health, in their physical well-being, in their sort of almost spiritual existence, almost like a spiritual experience. So swimming memoirs is one of those sort of comfort reads for me. So I'm really looking forward to this one. And then another sort of take on swimming, we have Splash, 10,000 Years of Swimming by Howard Means, which is obviously a history of swimming and its role in human lives. So it says, as refreshing as jumping into a pool on a hot summer's day, Splash sweeps across the whole of humankind's swimming history with an irrepressible enthusiasm that will make you crave your next step. I have read a swimming history related book called Swell, which was particularly on women's history of swimming. So this will be a nice complement to something I've already read and probably touch on other things related to this topic as well. Next we have a Dutch author, I think, and this is the Seaweeds Collector's Handbook by Mieke Zwanborn, and this was translated from the Dutch by Michelle Hutchinson, which this book is obviously about seaweed, and I feel like I came across this one through another book that it was referenced somewhere, and it's a very heavily illustrated book as well, which is one of the reasons I was drawn to it now. For the Springathon, I did a video on illustrated nature books, and this one seemed like one that would be nice to add to my shelves for something I could read that was heavily illustrated. Let's see if I can find some examples. Some of the illustrations are art things like this, and then you have illustrations like scientific illustrations like this. And as I said, it's just a natural history of seaweed. I am obviously very into marine life related things and water related things. So this sounded like an interesting mix of those things. And then three books that I have mentioned, I think all three of these in my Springathon TBR as well. We have The Shakein Houses, A Lighthouse History from Eddystone to Fastnet by Tom Nancolas, which is about sea houses, and it's one of those topics that I find also really compelled to. I think is sort of the combination of the water setting, obviously, with the isolation aspect of being in a very remote location. Like, I enjoy reading about Arctic exploration and mountaineering. I think this sort of fits into that category of types of topics and writing as well, and setting. And then another memoir I have is Michelle the Giant, An African in Greenland by Tete Michelle Kumasi, translated by James Kirkup. Okay, it says on the back of the book. And this one is a memoir slash travel writing. Michelle the Giant is his captivating account of this year-long journey over land and sea from West Africa to the Arctic Circle, how he learned the Inuit way of life in a frozen world and discovered what it means to belong. So it sounds like it might combine some indigenous knowledge within the book as well, which is always something I'm very interested in. And then a Indian author, again, that I mentioned in my Springathon TBR. This is How I Became a Tree by Samana Roy, and this one is a sort of a poetic memoir thing as well, I think. How I Became a Tree offers a new vision of what it means to be human in a natural world, hailed by reviewers as a love song to plants and trees and an ode to all that is unnoticed, ill-neglected, and yet resilient. Roy's stunning meditation on trees, forest, plant life, time, self, agency, and more emulate trees' spacious, relaxed rhythms. I've read samples of this one and found it to be very poetically written, so I suspect I will really like this one. And it's a fairly short book as well, so I will definitely be trying to read this one in the next few weeks. I probably won't get to it before the end of May, but I will be prioritizing it from all of the books that I have available as options. And then the last one of the nature-related ones, I think, that I have here is Island Dreams, Mapping and Obsession by Gavin Francis. And this is a book about islands and humans' fascination with them and the mapping of them. So again, this is heavily illustrated with tons and tons of maps, which, I mean, who doesn't love a good map in a book? And I love things related to islands, as probably everyone knows, and I feel like I'm being a broken record when it comes to my obsession with water. But this one just seemed like the kind of book that I really needed to own, to have in my collection. And it's published by Canongate, and they do fantastic stuff. I have one last nature-related book, although it's not entirely nature, but it is kind of related to nature, and that is The Path Through the Trees by Christopher Milne. So Christopher Milne is the son of A.A. Milne, mostly known as Christopher Robin. And I read his first memoir, The Enchanted Places, last year around this time of year, and really loved it. So I have been meaning to both buy that one in a physical copy because I listened to it as an audiobook, as well as get to his second book, which is this one. So I'm not sure if I will listen to the audiobook of this or read the physical copy or combine it, but I definitely needed to own a copy of it regardless, because I enjoyed his first memoir so much that I will want to have it in my collection. And in the first book he talks a lot about his relationship with his dad and the legacy of Christopher Robin as being a two-edged sword, sometimes being a fantastic thing that brought particular experiences and richness to his life, but sometimes the feeling of having almost like a ghost haunting you with this persona that had been created that wasn't really about him. And so there's a lot of things that I really loved about his first memoir. I think this one is not as much about his fame or his relationship with his dad or his character as Christopher Robin. I think this one is much more about his life, as I think particularly from adolescence and upwards, and I'm really looking forward to it. So I think this will be a joy, and I also really enjoyed the audiobook narrator of the first one, and I think the second one, this one, is also narrated by the same person. I will put the name of the narrator on the screen, so if you are at all interested in these books, I would definitely recommend the audio. Speaking of A. Milne, we have If I May by him, and this cover doesn't tell you much, but this is If I May by A. Milne. This is one of his essay collections. So I read, one of the first books I bought this year was By Way of Introduction by him, that I've already read, and we'll talk about in my next wrap up. And I absolutely love his nonfiction writing. This is a collection of essays that have been published previously elsewhere and collected into this volume. So I really love his essay writing. I think he has a lot of wit. Many of the essays he writes about being an author and being a writer, and he talks about his craft. He can write about anything, really. He writes on so many different topics, so some of them to do with life, everyday life things, like gardening is one of the topics he's touched on. Cricket is one thing that he returns to over and over and again, which is not my favorite topic, but I enjoy his writing on pretty much anything anyway. And I don't know what these essays will be about. I just know that I want to collect all of his nonfiction in particular. That is my priority, and when I've collected all of his nonfiction, I will be moving on to the rest of his fiction as well. Then we have the last few that are very miscellaneous. So we have a book, a Swedish book, that is called A Drop in Midnight, I think, in the English translation, by Jason Timbuktu Diakati. This is a Swedish singer and songwriter, I think. At least he's definitely a singer and performer. And this is his memoir of his life. It was published in the English translation, I think, a year or so ago. And that was actually how I came across the book in the first place. I think it might have been Agnes from Beyond the Epilogue and one of the hosts of Invisible Cities that brought my attention to this book in the English translation. One of the topics that I was drawn to it in particular was his writing on race-related issues in Sweden. It's one of those topics that I really wanted to read with my most immediate context. Because it's easy to read about race-related issues in the US and feel like it's completely separate from your reality, when of course things like that is prevalent all over the world, and it might not look exactly the same because of the justice system or the laws related to discrimination. I think it is important to think about societal issues with your own context, and that is the reason I've been seeking those types of stories out. So yeah, I don't know what to expect of this one. It's always interesting to see if an artist, a singer, is also a good writer, but I suspect he is because he's a really interesting singer. And then we have a book by Margot Jefferson, who wrote Negroland, that I was reading in February, I want to say. I didn't finish it. I had to return it to the library before I could finish it. So I want to return to that one and finish that one off. But I found this one in a local book sale, so I needed to get it because I really enjoyed her writing. And this one is called On Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson, provocateur, icon, enigma. Who was he really, and how does his spectacular rise and catastrophic fall reflect upon those who made him, those who broke him, and those who loved him? Almost 10 years on from Jackson's untimely death, here is Margaret Jefferson's definite and dazzling dissection of the King of Pop. A man admired for his music, his flair, his performances, and censored for his skin, his erratic behavior, and in his final years for his relationship with children. So I think this will be more like an analysis rather than being a full-blown biography. And because I know how she writes and how intelligent she is, I feel like this will be a really, really, really interesting, thought-provoking book. So definitely am keen to get to this one and also finish Negroland in the near future. And then lastly, we have two books that, although I have this one as a nonfiction book haul, these are sort of a mix of fiction and nonfiction from my understanding. So we have Youth by Tove Ditlevsen. This is actually in the Danish original because I wanted to attempt it. We'll see how it goes. This is the second book in the Copenhagen trilogy. I've seen it being marketed as a novel in most Scandinavian sites and bookshops and stuff like that. Whereas the English scene seemed to be focused on it being a memoir trilogy or autobiographies. So I am gonna say that this is probably autobiographical rather than being pure nonfiction. But either way, I'm really keen to continue on with this trilogy. I really liked a lot of her observations in the first one, and I am more interested in her as a adult, and I think this one touches on her young adult years, so when she's in her 20s, I think in particular. The last one I have here is The Rings of Saturn by W.G. Sebold, and again, this is a book that I've heard talked about as sort of a fiction non-fiction blend, or a book that straddles the line, sort of blending various threads of information and facts to build a kind of narrative. I'm not entirely sure if there's one clear narrative in this. Mesmerized by the mutability of all things, the narrator catalogues the transmigration of whole worlds. On every new thing there lies already the shadow of annihilation. So those were all of the books that I wanted to show you in this nonfiction book haul for the first half of 2022. But I would love to know if you've read any of these books. What were your thoughts on them? Do you have any books here that you would particularly be interested in hearing my thoughts on, so maybe I can prioritize getting to them and chat about them here. And I think that was all I wanted to say. I hope you're doing well and taking care of yourselves, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.